Hi there, Glocal citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around inspiration and impact in the world. I'm your host, Florence Adu. I am in a hot and humid Accra. I was over here thinking that the raining season was starting, but I'm foiled. It hasn't started, but we can't complain. My guest today is coming to me from a springtime place. I'm so happy to host her. She is a writer and editor of original literature for young people and adults. Her debut album, Powder Necklace, is based on her experience attending secondary school here in Ghana, and it ushered her into the it crowd of African writers as one of 39 of Sub-Saharan Africa's most promising writers under the age of 40. She has written for Parenting Magazine, The Village Voice, Ebony.com and Ebony Magazine, and even Ethiopian Airlines Salamata Magazine, to name a few. She is a featured author in Akashic Books' recent Accra Noir anthology. She is also a designer of clothing for the Made in Ghana lifestyle line, Exit 14. Nana Ekua Brew-Hammond, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Florence. I'm so excited to be here. I just want one thing I wanted to say is you said I was the writer of the debut album, and I claim it if I'm supposed to be a songwriter. But
did I say debut album?
Yeah, but I just wanted to say it was a novel.
Her debut novel. Okay. My bad. But yeah, she is a writer. And Powder Necklace was such a lovely story. I really, really enjoyed it. So let's just jump right into the conversation, Nana. Tell us more about where you're from, where you're local, and what is your craft, in your words.
So I am from Ghana and New York. I whenever someone asks me that, I'm always like, okay, how do I answer this question? I am from Ghana by way of my parents, and I went to school in Ghana from 13 to 15, and that was a huge part of my life. I go to Ghana as often as I get the chance to, and I have so much family there. So I really consider myself rooted in Ghana. But I was also born in the US, grew up in Queens, New York, and live in Queens right now. And have lived in Queens for most of my life. So I also consider myself very much a New Yorker, very much a Queens girl. So yeah, that's where I'm from, I answered where I was local, and what my craft is. So I am a writer. My focus is writing fiction, but I also have in the past written articles, and I did that for quite some time. And now I also, in addition, I've always been interested in fashion, and just from a young age, being in Ghana, a lot of our clothes are made by tailors and seamstresses. And so there's a connection to the things that you wear that's kind of different from when you just, go to a store and buy it. And so from youth, I was always like fascinated by like, oh, I can pick the fabric, I can choose the style. And as I've gotten older, just started designing pieces for myself mostly. And then in 2017, my sister, my mother, and I decided to start the clothing line, the lifestyle line, Exit 14, anchored by making coats for anyone who just loves our incredible textiles. We focus on the textile that is native to the northernmost regions of Ghana, Batakari. And just the ability to translate that awesome fabric to the context of, cooler climate. So that's why that's what Exit 14 is about.
What does Exit 14 mean?
So Exit 14 is based on a personal story. My sister and I were driving our younger brother to college, and we had to pick up some supplies for him. He went to college in upstate New York, and they directed us to a store to pick up supplies for him for school, and it was off Exit 14.
Okay.
And so
is this I-95?
I don't even remember now. It was probably the name of the state throughway.
Okay.
As we were driving, we got to like exit 12. Okay. Exit 13 came along, and then it took forever. We were driving for what felt like over an hour. And we were convinced that we had lost our way. So we ended up turning back after driving for like a long time, from exit 13. And we asked for directions from a local. And when we described where we had been, she was like, "You were like basically almost there." And so for my sister and I, it became our shorthand, like, just stay the course. You're almost there. We'd be like, exit 14, exit 14.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so for us, it felt like the perfect name for our brand because one, we travel so much where like, we're Ghanaians, but we're in this different context and we're always sort of all over the place. And it's easy to feel like, maybe, you're not where you're supposed to be in that moment, but it's sort of like that reminder to just stay the course. You're on the path, you're headed to the right place.
Nice, nice. I love that story. That's so cute. That's great. And I know family is really big for you. And I know your family, of course. So
Yes,
love
it
them all.
is.
Hug, hug. So tell us a little bit more. I want to go a little bit deeper into the fashion right now, and then we'll talk a little bit more about writing later. So Batakari. So your family, tell us more about where your family is from in Ghana, so we get a little bit of an understanding of how Northern Ghana plays into it, and maybe why you gravitated towards that, or just a general idea of your Ghana.
Okay, so we are not from the north. My mother is Ewe and my father is Fanti and Ga. So my sort of introduction to Ghanaian textiles was, kente and
Mhm.
cloth, in Ewe Edo,
Mhm. Mhm.
intuma, cloth
Mhm.
and
Mhm. Mhm.
the cotton printed textiles. So in probably my dad, had like a few Batakari smocks. And I remember like probably in the early 2000s when I really sort of started getting more interested in Ghanaian fashion. I remember like stealing my dad's Batakari smock and
I
wearing it as a
remember.
dress.
Yeah.
Yes. And
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, this is the cutest mini dress.
Mhm.
And I remember like it became my thing. And my mom would be like, we don't do that. You don't wear it that way. And I'd be like, I don't care. I'm wearing it this way. And so I just fell in love with like the way it was made, the way it was woven. I'm a person that really loves craftsmanship and detail, and I really
Mhm.
loved the embroidered design up the neckline, etc.
Mhm.
So that was like my first taste of batakari. And then anytime I would go to Ghana after that, I would be like, stop the car. Whenever I saw any batakari on the roadside, I would buy some.
Mhm.
And I collected a lot of batakaris. And then, probably when John Mahama was president, they had started an organization called SADA, and I don't remember what it stands for. But the focus of SADA was to really kind of support the economic growth of the Sahara region in Ghana. And so one of the things that came out of that was they started selling batakari not made, but as cloth, right? Like as pieces that you
Mhm.
could
Mhm.
that was available to the public in a way that it hadn't been before,
Mm.
and just giving more visibility to like this amazing tradition of weavers and textile artists. And
Mhm.
so we traveled to the north. We did like an amazing 2-week trip where we drove from Accra to the then Upper East region, Upper West region, and the Northern region, and drove throughout it. And on part of that trip, we met this amazing Batakari artist, weaver, designer. And so that was like, the kind of the next leg of that journey of like, our interest. And so we started just buying Batakari. And what I loved about it is because it's heavier, we could wear it in colder months in the States.
Mhm.
And so we decided to make coats for ourselves. And
Mhm.
I will never forget this day. My sister and I went out. We were each wearing a coat, a Batakari coat. And my mom was in London and was wearing, her coat. And that day, like I'm telling you, every 2 steps, people stopped us like, what's going on? Where did you get this coat? This is so amazing. This is so amazing. And so we have a group WhatsApp, and we just like messaged each other like, did people stop you too? And my mom was like, oh my goodness, like I couldn't take 2 steps. And so we were like, maybe we should just see if people would be interested in this. So we did, like, we put them up for sale. Like, we just decided to do that. And the interest was so like great that we decided to do a couple more styles, and we started pitching it around, and Vogue covered us. And then, everybody knew about us, and we were like, oh my goodness, this is so amazing. And so that's how this all kind of came to be.
Nice. Like, debut line gets covered by Vogue.
I know. Awesome. It's God. Thank you, Lord. I mean, truly.
So you launched in 2018 or?
We launched in, okay, maybe I'm getting the timeline wrong. I think it was 2017, or maybe it was 2018. I think it was 2017.
Okay. So you launched then, so you're like 5 years in. So how is the fashion world? I mean, we're now post-COVID, so I know a lot of fashion brands have been like hard hit by that phenomenon, particularly for those people who dress, right? So it seems like the sweats and leggings and yoga wear is all the rage, but for high fashion, it's been a bit of a different space. So how has it been the last couple of years?
I mean, I think that it definitely has been a time of like growing in terms of like what our business is about and, what we're focused on. But I think like just with respect to COVID, I think that initially none of us really knew what was happening. I think the whole world was sort of like blindsided by COVID, right? Like 1 minute, everything was fine. And then the next weekend we were in like an indefinite lockdown quarantine, and we didn't know how long it would last. At some point, at one point we thought, oh, by summer of 2020, it'll be over. And then that obviously wasn't the case. So I think that our focus wasn't on like trying to like sell. Our focus was on just trying to stay safe, if you will. And I think that, and then it was also all the borders were closed. So our focus wasn't really on that. And one thing about us, you talked about like what is the fashion world? And I think that like, as somebody who used to write for a magazine that covered lots of like fashion brands, and someone who worked for a retail company for several years, I think, yes, we are definitely a fashion statement and a fashion brand. But I think that beyond that, we are really focused on providing a service to our customers. So we're not really, I don't think of myself like I don't think we're focused. I think I don't know how to say this, but like, I think that it's not just about like sort of being part of a fashion vertical, but really about a lifestyle. We're not trying to produce something that like, comes out like, spring 2018, fall 2019. Like, it's not about like hitting the seasonal calendar. It's about acquiring pieces that you will have forever, one, and also that are sustainably made, that are reflective of a generation's old culture and tradition and artistry. There's so many levels to it. So as far as we're concerned, we're a brand that like is evergreen. Like nothing ever stopped. Like you can always buy our pieces, and they're here they're here basically. So that's how we've been thinking about this whole pandemic, and just grateful that like, in New York anyway, things seem to be kind of taking a turn for the better. And we're coming out, and they're slowly, they're saying in June, they're going to be reopening things. So that's exciting.
Yeah. Yes.
And just, we're grateful that Ghana has, not been hard hit. So grateful for that. So just kind of, keeping what's important. So yeah.
Okay. Yep. Makes sense. I hear you all the way. So let me ask you this. So I typically ask this question, why the where? And you've kind of hit on that. But as someone who's a traveler, as you mentioned, and is a global person, let me ask you that. Why the where? Like, how did you come to be living and working and playing where you live? So maybe how did you choose New York, and how did you choose versus somewhere else?
Well, like I said, I was born in the US and raised in New York for most of my life, with the exception of the 3 years that I went to school in Ghana. So I feel like I chose to stay here because it felt like, and it feels like, a place where I can be more mobile, if you will. I feel like in New York, I am not only exposed to so many different cultures and contexts, but it is also easy to travel to other places from New York.
That's true.
So I think that for right now, it makes sense. And because I am a writer as well, I love the fact that like publishing companies are in New York.
Right.
There's a lot of, this is like a center for a lot of the things that I do and that I'm focused on. So
that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. So you just mentioned publishing. So you come from a Ghanaian family, and usually, and I say this, we have this conversation often on the podcast, like, oh, my parents, or the typical parents are like, oh, doctor, lawyer, engineer, something of that nature. So tell us, how did writing become a part of you?
So since I was a kid, I have always been writing. I was like that child that would, when we would go to like family functions at an auntie's house, I would be in the bedroom where all the coats were piled on the bed writing. I would just like bring my little notebook with me and be writing. I was always writing as a kid. So that's kind of like where it began. But like how I got into it professionally was sort of like a winding road. My parents did sort of feel that I should pursue a profession that would, have a guaranteed income. So I ended up sort of choosing advertising because I knew that that was a place where I could write. And I was a copywriter. I was a staff copywriter for many years before I like transitioned to freelance copywriting. And I became, how my first novel came about was basically I couldn't give up like writing. And this story of my experience attending secondary school in Ghana was just something that I always knew, even from when I was at Infantiman Girls Secondary School, that I was like, I gotta write about this. This is like the wildest and most seminal experience that I'm having. So anyway, so I knew that that was something that I just started writing on my way to and from work on the subway in New York. And so that's what I did. And I, pitched it for many years to agents, finally got an agent and she sold it. And that's how the book came to be.
Okay. So tell us more about the pitching and finding an agent, because that's critical in the career of a writer, to be a published writer, if I'm not mistaken. So tell us more about that, how that emerged.
Well, I want to say, first of all, that like, everyone's path is circuitous and yes, the indifferent. So like, if you don't have an agent, it is possible to sell a novel. Some people self-publish, etc. So I just want to say that off the bat. But for me, the pitch process was, every agent has a different way that they prefer to be pitched. So I just did a lot of research, just looking up like, okay, some people want the first 50 pages. Some people want the first 100 pages. Some people want the first 2 chapters, etc. And just really kind of going down the line and like sending it to all these different people. It took me at that time 4 years to find an agent. I got rounds and rounds and rounds and rounds of rejection. It was really tough, but I feel like I've compared it to like finding a spouse. Like I feel like there's so much like searching, but then when you are connected with the person who gets your work, it clicks. And, and you need that because that's the person who's out front for you selling your work. And so they need to be super passionate about it. And so my agent at the time was this young woman who was, we just clicked. And she was really passionate about what I was doing. And she was able to sell the book within like 3 months.
Oh, wow.
Once of signing. So that was so exciting. After 4 years of rejection to get that like, oh, snap, it's sold,
Right. That's really interesting. So not to give away much of the story, I love that story because I didn't go to school in Ghana and I read it well before moving to Ghana. And so I felt like I had a window into, and I came here to work with young people. And so I had this different window into like, wow, secondary school is no joke, when you, especially coming for the culture shock that it could be coming and living and making life. So just to kind of get a sense of flavor and to segue into my Glocal Speak question, tell us one of the stories that impacted you the most significantly in your experience at secondary school, and dovetail that with what you might find is and I want to ask you Glocal Speak in Ghana. So that's a word or flavor thing that makes real impact for you.
Okay. So in terms of experience, when I was in secondary school, my school had a major water crisis. And that was something that was so wild to me because, coming from the US, like not having water was something that never entered like my my thinking at all. I mean,
Right.
it seemed impossible to think that, oh, like you turn on the tap, water comes out of it. And so to be faced with that, like, wow, there's no water coming out of the tap. What do we drink? How do we bathe? And being in that context, you're already away from your family. And I was not only away from my like family in Ghana, but I was away from my parents who were in the States. So I think that was a real wake up call to like, one, the world is not just what you experienced in this one context in the US. And that was very eye-opening to me. And just sort of, how do you take care of yourself? Because you're already in boarding school, you already have to take care of yourself, but how do you take care? And so that was probably one of the most profound experiences that I had while I was there. And in terms of Glocal Speak,
wait, so can I ask how long?
Sure.
How long did the crisis last? Was it ongoing?
It was ongoing, and they actually, a couple of years after I graduated, they finally got like this huge tanker that like was brought onto the campus. And now it's so funny because whenever I go to Ghana, at least once a year, I have been going for the last several years, last 2 decades, and I go to the school almost every year to visit. And when I see like they have like they are so watered up, like they do not play. Like each house has like a huge like monster gallon, like I don't know what those like 100-gallon tanks like for each house. Plus there's like, I don't even know, like a truck-sized tanker filled with water at different points on the campus as well. So they have definitely addressed the problem, thank God, because it was horrid while we were there.
I mean, I can say that I have been confronted lately. We've been having water problems. And I think generally the globe, I don't know if we've come to understand how important water is. And that whole idea of taking it for granted, being in, the northern countries that have it and it's there. But it's like feeling naked almost. Like you just feel like, oh, I just feel at a loss. Like I woke up this morning and my tap was not working. Fortunately, I have backup. But then when you don't have backup, when that runs out, then you're just like, oh, wow. So we had a week. We had a week where the whole of Eastern Accra was waterless. So if you can imagine, it was just, you could imagine, but
I can imagine.
I can relate to that story. So I interrupted you. You were continuing.
I mean, I think that was a big thing for me as a kid, because I think as a child, you already take so much for granted. Things are just, if you're blessed to have like a family like that's taking care of you, or a guardian taking care of you, like you don't think about like how they're taking care of you and where's the money coming from. You're just living. And so to be thrust into that context where like you couldn't take water for granted, which seemed so elemental, so fundamental to life, that was huge. And it was a wake-up call. And I think that though I'm not of the school, like you have to go through these awful, terrible things to teach you something, I will say that it really gave me a profound lesson at a young age about like the importance of like, that you can make it through like the most crazy situations. You can make it through. And you can like you can make it stronger. You can make it out stronger than you were before you came. And I was going to say Glocal Speak, since you had added that question in. I would say my sort of favorite expression is "Hey."
Yes,
um,
we love it.
I
Mhm.
yeah, I feel like that is whenever I hear an "Hey," like I know I am in the company of an African, a Ghanaian,
Mhm.
like, and A means so many different things, like, depending on the context. It's
Mhm.
like, hey, look at you, like, or like,
Mhm.
there's just so many. I couldn't even begin
Yeah,
to decipher all of the meanings it has. But
sure.
that's like one of my favorites.
Yes, one of those wordless expressions. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
We love it,
Mm-hmm.
eh?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So one of your most recent endeavors is this Accra Noir, which is an anthology that was put together by Akashic Books, I believe. And so tell us about how you went from writing your first novel and continue writing, of course, but how then have you emerged and immersed yourself into the cadre of young African writers and
Mhm.
authors?
Well, so Akashic Books has
Mhm.
a series called has a noir series. They
Right.
have done like Lagos Noir,
Mhm.
Brooklyn Noir,
Mhm.
Addis Ababa Noir, etc. And so
Mhm.
Accra Noir came out in December of 2020 to add to that body of work.
Mhm.
The editor of that project is called Nana Ekua. She is an amazing writer, also Ghanaian,
Mhm.
and she's actually such an amazing just mentor to me. When my first when Powder Necklace was released in 2010, like she just found me on Twitter, reached out to me, and just kind of encouraged me, and has been an encouragement to me on this process. So I was so I really admire her and respect her. And when she invited me to submit a story to Accra Noir, I was delighted. I have never written noir before.
Mhm.
So it was an exciting opportunity to just stretch myself and try something new. And, when it's funny, you asked me that question in that way of like sort of young African writers, because when in 2013 I submitted to be part of the Africa 39 anthology.
Mhm.
And, one of the ways that they described us are like, we're the most promising, African writers under, 39 and under. And they said that, we have the potential to shape the literary trends coming out of that region. And I've thought about that a lot. And, as sort of we've gotten older, I mean, 2013 was, almost a decade ago. I've been thinking to myself, like, wow, like that's such a big mantle to place on like 39 writer,
Mhm.
like this group of writers, like you have the potential to shape the literary trends coming out of this region. And I thought, like, on some level, it's really cocky and sort of culturally chauvinistic to say that. I say that because it's sort of like, not because we're not good writers, but it just feels like this anointment, right,
Mhm.
from this group on us. But in thinking about it more and thinking about it more deeply, I think it's actually an amazing opportunity and responsibility that we're not just called to, to write our stories, but it's also this wonderful opportunity for us to also be part of creating a community and like helping support other people to also get published and to get that encouragement, like just as I was telling you, like how Nana Madankwa reached out to me and many other people reached
Mm.
out to me when my book first came out, and they like gave me, they took the time to give me advice and just put me on to like what it was to be like an author. And I feel like that's really what that Africa 39 sort of anointment was like, as
Mhm.
something like Michelle Obama says, it's like, you're in now and don't close the door behind you. Like keep it open for the people that are also on the way up, or and also extend yourselves to each other. Like just build community, basically.
So, in being part of that group and finding that community, how has that potentially influenced your work?
Oh my goodness, it's influenced me so much. First of all, it was my first exposure to writers who don't write in English, because that group was, we had a writer from Equatorial Guinea,
Mhm,
we had a writer from Cote d'Ivoire, we had a writer from Congo. And so just kind of I mean, this, like, of course, there are writers and books happening
mhm,
in all over the world. But, just to be exposed to African writing that was happening, outside of an
mhm,
Anglophone context was just really wonderful. And I think that that was one of the best parts of that experience of just kind of meeting writers and
mhm,
meeting writers in other countries. I think that when you come from, like, especially
mhm,
sort of in my experience, like as an immigrant child, my initial understanding of like Africa
mhm,
back home was only through the lens of Ghana. And it was only when I started traveling to other African countries that I was like, oh, it's different. Like, and it seems so obvious, but like, there's this tendency to, like, paint Africa with this, like, broad brush, like it's all one way. But when you start to visit other cultures and meet people from other countries and
mhm,
contexts, then you start to see, like, oh my goodness, like, this is such a,
mhm,
and again, it's so obvious, but it just bears repeating that, like, we are not a monolith. And so I think that, like, we need to kind of just keep bringing, like, driving that home, just driving that home. If you're a reader who is only, you like
mhm,
African
mhm,
literature, but you're only reading like works from one country, or works that is in
mhm,
that
mhm,
from Anglophone countries, West Africa, for example. I would really encourage, I try to encourage myself as well to just read outside of that,
mhm, mhm.
read writers from, North Africa, read writers from Southern Africa, read writers from Lusophone Africa, etc. So that is something that I really feel passionate about.
Right. So, we in the West or the global North, we have kind of set industries that consume literature in a way that it seems to be a bit different than in the global South and in Africa and, other countries where we just don't necessarily have the resources for publishing or the platforms available to us. So within that community and in your understanding of what the writer's experience is in Africa or somewhere else, how would you describe the business challenges that you've heard authors experience and even just through the Akashic Books experience, because it's a Ghana-based publishing house, but the audience, I think, necessarily has to be global and definitely more diaspora because of the nature of, first of all, our education systems and all those things that really lead to the culture of consuming literature from a commercial perspective. So, I guess just to boil it down is how do you see authors based in Africa making a living as writers?
Well, first of all, I want to clarify something.
Hmm.
Akashic Books is actually based in Brooklyn.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, it's based in Brooklyn.
Hmm.
It's founded by a gentleman called Johnny Temple.
Oh,
And
okay.
if you go on their website, their goal is decolonizing literature. So they're
Mm-hmm.
really focused on that. And they have partnered with Cassava Republic, which is,
Ah,
um,
Nigeria.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Hmm.
And it's based in Nigeria and the UK.
Hmm.
And they are handling the release and launch of Accra Noir in Accra, in Ghana,
Okay. Okay.
um, Lagos, and other parts of Nigeria, and the UK and other parts of that community. So
Mhm.
I think that there's actually this understanding that's actually not fact based, or not true, that, like, how do you call it, like, there isn't a readership, on the continent for us. I just think that, frankly, a lot of the publishing company, the Western publishing industry, maybe just hasn't don't have the relationships or the contacts and the knowledge yet of, like, how to market books in
Mm,
our part of the world, and
mm,
parts of the world. Because I think about, like, how many, when you're driving in Accra, like, how many of those, like people who are selling books on the
mhm,
roadside, and
mhm.
people stop and buy those books, and
Yeah.
there are bookstores, like, across, Accra. And
Mhm.
So I think that it's just a matter of understanding the market and understanding how to market to the different segments.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that now that we are in a globalized and glocalized world, there is more appetite for international publishers to really understand the market and partner with people who know the market, so that we can really get books into the hands of readers. So on the continent. So I would just say that. I think that as a writer, one thing that I can say is that I remember this so well. I did an event in Accra on the day of the World Cup finale. The game was happening. I thought no one was going to be there. And the place was packed. I mean, packed, shoulder to shoulder. And I was just like, wow. And they were saying yeah, the finale is going. Otherwise you'd have more people here. And that happens all the time. Every event that I've done, there has been such a strong showing because people are, one, they're proud of you. But they're also there's such an appetite to come together around literature. So yes. I almost feel it's more enthusiastic in a way than in a city like New York, where we have so many of these events at our disposal that in some ways we can take it for granted. So yeah, I think that there's just this real appetite for connection around literature and stuff. So I think that as a writer, you wouldn't be at a loss for finding people who are interested in your work, and interested in supporting you. I do think that it's an interesting challenge. If you're on your own, you go from bookstore to bookstore, but I know writers who have done it. And when I go to Accra, there are times when I'll bring my, few copies to a bookstore and ask them to hold it and sell it. And if they sell it, they send me the money, So, and there's some great bookstores. There's a bookstore that's an online, and they will deliver the books to you. It's called Book Nook.
Yep.
It's started by Nana Ekua Brew-Hammond, and Nana Ekua Brew-Hammond he and his publishing partner Kofi Akpabli have been just real leaders in this space of just kind of providing. I believe they have a publishing company as well. I think it's called Dakpabli. Where they just really have been providing ways for writers to sell their work on the continent. There's also the Writers Project of Ghana, which is so amazing. They have for years done a weekly radio show on City FM. They do workshops. They do retreats. They now produce the Peja Literary Festival in Accra annually. I think this last one was the third year that they've been doing it. And, so and these kinds of organizations are all over the continent. So there are real ways for writers to, I think the main thing is what we were talking about earlier, is just connecting with people and being in community, because I know that they have been so supportive of me throughout this journey of, being an author, throwing a launch for me, bringing people together, so that we could discuss my work, or, inviting me to speak at different panels and things like that, and just encouraging me along the way. So I feel if you're a writer and, you want to get your work out there and sell it, it's all about just sort of identifying those organizations, finding that community and being part of it and supporting it.
Right. So ultimately, it's not so big business in our part of the world. It may be getting there, but it's getting.
What I will say, I don't want to say that because I know that there are publishers on the continent and they are making money. So I can only speak from my experience. I do think that there's definitely a business. They're printers who are printing these books and selling them. So they are making money. And I think that they would be in a better position to explain, what the actual financials are and how big the business is and the growth potential and all of that. But I would just say, as a writer, if you are just starting out, I would say that the main thing is get connected with those organizations that support writers and identifying the individuals who are leading the way. Because I think that that's the beginning. And then also just reaching out to bookstores, because there are bookstores. As long as there's a bookstore there, talk to someone about like selling your book there.
And
I wanted to add that there's this really great organization in Accra, and I'm going to butcher what it stands for, but LOATAD, and it's like a library that has just been founded. And there are other libraries in Accra, and they are also, this LOAD in particular is really passionate about like stocking African writers from all over the continent. And I think that initiatives like that are also really important, because I think that it's important to have our books like available to in our context on the continent.
Okay, so that stands for the Library of Africa and the African Diaspora.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. So no, that's a great lead. And I think the library movement is also burgeoning. And I say a little bit of what I'm seeing on the context of consumerism is because, I'm here working in the media space and particularly looking at children's books. So I think from the adult perspective, that definitely fits into the, there's places to go and things to see. But I just find that the consumer level for children's content, the appetite is somewhat there and it's driven by schools, but the masses haven't adopted it or adapted it. And part of it is probably a little bit on the what's out there level and just kind of getting parents to connect, maybe not in words because they don't always have the words, but in some other way. So yeah, I feel you in that sense.
Yeah. And I think that's the key, some other way, because I think that especially when, for those of us who also have like come from a Western context, it feels like it's established and this is the right way to do it. But I think what is so wonderful about Ghana and our other markets is that like there is so much opportunity to create what it is that is right for that specific context. And I think that like it's all about like what I've seen in Ghana that I admire so much is just like the creativity of the hustle. Like, like when you start talking to people who are, entrepreneurs, like they battle odds creatively and they come up with ideas that like are so out of the box because it's a different context. And I think that we should embrace the fact that like, it may not even be about going to a bookstore and that may not be the right context for a specific, communities, in Ghana, for example, for children's books.
Exactly.
It might be just a whole other thing. So I just think that that's where we as creatives and people who are tasked to innovate and called to innovate and, inspired to innovate, that's where we can really kind of flourish, right? And like come up with something that is just so unexpected, so fresh, and so tailored to the market.
So what you've just said makes me think of my mindset hack. So what would you say is your favorite mindset hack?
My favorite mindset hack is don't talk yourself out of it. We can look at a circumstance and feel that it's impossible and start telling ourselves that. And then we talk ourselves out of the thing that we want to do, the vision that we have for something. And I think that, like when we're talking about, like oftentimes in Ghana, like I hear people say, and I've often said like, oh my goodness, this is so frustrating. This is never going to get better. Or like, oh, this government this, or, some sort of complaint that makes it seem like, there's no way out of a specific situation. And I think that we don't understand how powerful our words are to even just sort of shape our own vision of what we think can happen. Because once we start telling ourselves like, oh my God, it's never going to get better, nothing's ever going to change, we start to believe that. And once we believe that, we basically maintain the status quo. And most of us don't want to maintain the status quo. We want things to get better and we want to change things. So I'm learning, don't talk myself out of it. Stay the course, focus on what you can do, and also speak big things, like dream big, and like don't be afraid of that. Like walk towards the thing that seems impossible, because the thing that is possible now was impossible at some point before.
Right. Right. That's lovely. I like that sentiment. So when you're not writing, when you're not designing, What kind of things are you watching or listening to?
I'm watching documentaries. I've
Mhm.
really been into documentaries. And I have really been just listening to worship music lately, like
Mm.
talking about like sort of don't talk yourself out of it.
Mhm.
I'm realizing more and more, why the old church ladies were always like they seemed crazy, like all they listen to is like worship music. All they do is read like, those books. But now I'm understanding like to get your mind right, sometimes you need to just really immerse yourself in things that build you up and
Mhm.
edify you.
Mm.
And so that's what I've been on the music tip.
Mhm.
And yeah,
Mhm.
and documentaries, just like learning. I love like learning history
Yeah.
and what's happening in our world.
Okay. What's one that you would recommend for our listeners?
Uh, Documentary. I'm in the middle of watching something called Closure. And it was
Mm.
just an interesting documentary about a Black woman who was adopted by a white family. And she grew up in Washington State in the US, which is very, very white.
Mhm.
And, she basically had a longing to connect with her birth family. And it's just a really powerful story of how she found first her birth father and
Mm.
then her birth mother.
Mm.
And it's just really emotional, story. So I appreciated that.
And what platform is that on?
It is on Amazon Prime.
Okay, so we'll have that in the show notes, folks, so you can also check out Closure. Nana, this has been great having you here.
Thank you. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Thank you for having me. I love this podcast. As I mentioned, I listened to the Esther Amma one,
Mhm.
and I really admire her and the work that she's doing. So, and I've seen that you've had so many people that I admire
Yeah.
on the show. So I'm really excited to be a guest. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Yes, yes. So before we go, what's next and what's new for you?
So I am working on a
Mhm.
novel. It has been, I'm excited to. I'm working on a
Okay.
novel, and I am also working on editing a collection as well. So just stay tuned.
Okay.
Stay
Okay.
tuned.
Okay. Well,
And a children's book. I have a children's picture book coming as
yay!
well.
Yay! Hooray for kids. I love it. I love it. Yay!
Yay! Me
Yay.
too.
So that's wonderful. So folks, this has been another episode. And actually, before I move into that, let me just ask. So any last words for our listeners today?
I no, I just want to say again, thank you for
Mhm.
having me. And I just love the premise of this show, like, just Glocal, because I feel like we're all like the world has become so
Yeah.
connected. So you don't even have to leave your context to be exposed to like what's happening
Yes.
globally. And so I just love that you're celebrating
Thank
that.
you. Thank you. Thank you. So, folks, this has been another episode of Glocal Citizens. You can find new episodes every Tuesday at www.glocalcitizenspod.com and wherever you get your podcasts. Please, please, please subscribe, like, share, tell a friend, recommend a guest. And as always, bye for now. Thank you, Nana.